The galaxy was a machine of consumption, a sprawling network of worlds and civilizations organized not by law, trade, or diplomacy, but by predation. Strength dictated status, and only the relentless survived. Across countless systems, apex species had evolved to dominate, refining violence into both art and instinct. Their planets were crucibles of hostility, shaping creatures optimized for speed, endurance, and brutality. Every conquest was catalogued, every prey evaluated, and every victory celebrated in rituals older than most stars. For these predators, the universe was a banquet, and anything weaker than themselves existed solely to be consumed or subjugated. In this hierarchy, planets were measured by yield, biomass, infrastructure, cognitive capacity, resistance potential. Civilizations that displayed ingenuity or resilience were recorded, admired briefly, and then extinguished as examples. Failure to submit was a lesson in futility. Species that dared challenge them did so only once. Entire worlds vanished, leaving behind nothing more than the faintest echoes in predator chronicles. Their arrogance was baked into every interaction, every strategy session, every fleet formation. Survival for them was a certainty, extinction was a concept reserved for the weak. When Earth entered their databases, it was a minor blip, a mid-tier world orbiting a sun of negligible importance. The humans were catalogued as soft, fragile, and inefficient, an omnivorous species with predictable behaviors, limited technological development, and extreme environmental volatility. Their homeworld's chaotic climate and gravity extremes were seen not as evidence of extraordinary adaptation, but as minor quirks. Analysts classified humanity as low-threat, expendable, and amusingly sentimental. Emotional complexity was recorded as a liability, cooperation as disorder, and morality as a temporary distraction from survival. These were creatures the predators assumed could be broken with minimal effort. The predators' fleets approached with the certainty of history, armed with war forms and biological constructs perfected over eons. Vast ships, their hulls etched with symbols of past victories, traversed the void like celestial hunters. Their plan was simple: establish dominance quickly, extract value from the planet, and leave as legends had dictated. No negotiation, no hesitation. In their experience, negotiation was a formality, extinction inevitable. Prey never dictated terms. Humanity's mere existence was inconsequential to the predators' calculations. Yet even as their ships shadowed the planet, their sensors and probes scanning for weakness, they overlooked the subtle indicators of Earth's uniqueness. The predators interpreted human social structures as chaotic, their environmental adaptability as marginal, their technological potential as slow to mature. They assumed fear and instinct would suffice to force submission. What they did not comprehend was the crucible these humans had survived. Their entire evolutionary path had been a series of near-impossible challenges. Gravity and weather extremes, predatory species within their own ecosystem, and environmental instability had honed them in ways no predator archive could quantify. The very fragility they dismissed contained the seeds of unpredictability. Preparations for first contact were meticulous but conventional. They assumed shock, intimidation, and strategic strikes would elicit compliance. Their fleets were arrayed for display and combat, war forms ready to purge or intimidate, but they had not yet calculated the human capacity for cohesion, resistance, and unconventional strategy. In their arrogance, they saw Earth as another checklist, a world whose resistance could be crushed with minimal effort. They believed their dominance absolute, their history unbroken, their victory inevitable. As the first predator vessels entered orbit, humanity remained a statistical note on their records, untested and underestimated. The galaxy's most feared hunters were poised to assert supremacy, confident that nothing could interrupt the natural order they had maintained for millennia. They were wrong. History had never accounted for a species that could survive, endure, and adapt with relentless ingenuity. Humans were still unproven, their true strength invisible to sensors and misjudged by experience. In that moment, the predators assumed certainty, unaware that the universe itself was about to challenge their definition of power. When the predator fleets first arrived in human space, the scale of their presence was staggering. Dozens of colossal vessels, each bristling with offensive systems and biological weaponry, drifted through orbit with a confidence born of centuries of unchallenged dominance. They radiated power, every sensor sweep and probe calibrated to detect weakness. Their intent was clear: to establish absolute control swiftly, to remind humans of their place in the cosmic hierarchy. They expected submission, calculated fear, and anticipated chaos. What they encountered was something entirely unforeseen. Humanity's initial response was cautious but organized. Planetary governments scrambled fleets, redirected civilian infrastructure, and initiated emergency protocols designed for survival rather than direct confrontation. Communication channels were opened in every direction, attempts made to establish contact, convey intentions, and de-escalate the perceived threat. Messages were clear, logical, and deliberate, offering dialogue, trade, and cooperation. Yet these overtures were read by predator intelligence as signs of weakness, hesitation, and incompetence. Every gesture of peace was catalogued as fear, every delay as indecision. In the outer colonies, the predators launched their first tactical strikes. Warforms descended with clinical precision, targeting installations designed to defend, not provoke. Evacuations were prioritized. Civilian populations were moved, protected, and preserved above all else. Human forces avoided direct engagement, focusing instead on minimizing loss and buying time. The predators interpreted this restraint as cowardice, misunderstanding the human impulse to safeguard life as an inability to fight. They expected panic, retreat, and submission. They found strategy, patience, and unexpected cohesion. Humans analyzed every predator movement with meticulous attention, noting attack patterns, response times, and sensory blind spots. Civilian engineers adapted industrial machinery into defensive systems, while scientists dissected predator biology through observation alone. Every human act, from rerouting energy grids to coordinating mass evacuations, was a study in efficiency and improvisation. The predators, accustomed to instant capitulation under threat, could not comprehend the deliberate, measured patience they observed. Losses occurred. Human colonies burned, starships were destroyed, and thousands perished in the opening days of the conflict. Grief and outrage spread quickly, fueling a determination that the predators could not measure. Instead of retreating into fear, humans consolidated, reinforcing critical systems, fortifying strategic locations, and protecting their population centers with ingenuity rather than sheer force. These acts of survival were invisible to predator analysis. Emotional investment and moral choice could not be quantified, yet they had immediate tactical effects. Attempts at communication continued alongside defense. Humans broadcast data, navigational charts, and cultural artifacts, seeking to establish connection or at least comprehension. The predators, interpreting these efforts as hesitation or ritualized begging, escalated their aggression. Larger strikes were planned, fleets repositioned, and terror tactics implemented to break what they believed was fragile human morale. Every display of dominance was intended to provoke fear, yet the humans absorbed these strikes, adapted rapidly, and responded with strategic patience. By the time the predators recognized the unexpected resilience of human defenses, initial plans had already failed. The humans did not collapse under intimidation, nor did they retaliate immediately. Instead, they studied, calculated, and prepared, demonstrating a pattern entirely foreign to the predator's centuries of experience. This misalignment of expectation and reality created the first cracks in predator confidence. Their assumption of absolute superiority was challenged not by overwhelming force, but by a species that refused to behave predictably. What began as a demonstration of dominance was now a slow, escalating puzzle. The predators still held immense power, but uncertainty crept into every tactical decision. Humans, once dismissed as insignificant, had revealed a capacity for patience, strategy, and cohesion that the predators had never encountered. This initial contact, intended to assert control, had instead exposed the first signs of a profound miscalculation, a species underestimated not for weakness, but for their unpredictable endurance, moral choice, and relentless adaptability. Humanity responded to extinction not with panic, but with transformation. The moment it became clear that survival was uncertain, old divisions, nations, ideologies, rivalries, dissolved under the pressure of necessity. Military, scientific, and civilian resources merged into unified networks, coordinated across planetary systems. Decisions were driven by data, adaptability, and immediate survival imperatives rather than tradition or pride. Every human action, from the smallest civilian modification to fleet-wide tactical planning, became part of a larger, cohesive strategy. The first stage of adaptation relied on observation. Humans studied predator behavior meticulously, mapping attack sequences, timing patterns, and psychological tendencies. Every engagement revealed vulnerabilities, over-reliance on intimidation, predictable pursuit behavior, and a dependence on fear responses that had never failed before. Engineers repurposed industrial machinery into weapons of precision, converting mining lasers, atmospheric regulators, and propulsion systems into instruments of both defense and offense. Scientific teams exploited environmental extremes, manipulating terrain, weather, and orbital dynamics to level the playing field. Humans endured losses with efficiency. Entire colonies were evacuated or sacrificed, not as cowardice, but as deliberate measures to preserve essential infrastructure and knowledge. Death became a strategic consideration, not a moment of chaos. Survivors adapted technologies on the fly, civilian transport converted into stealth ships, energy grids reconfigured to power defensive systems, and automated systems programmed to act in anticipation of predator tactics. Improvisation was constant, creativity under pressure routine. Each setback became a learning opportunity, every encounter a lesson stored for future strategy. By prioritizing endurance over retaliation, humans inverted the predator's assumptions. Where the hunters expected fear and retreat, they met persistence and calculation. When faced with overwhelming power, humans did not fold, they dispersed, reorganized, and struck in ways the predators could not predict. Psychological patterns that had worked for millennia against other civilizations failed catastrophically. Humans were not simply fighting to survive, they were studying, learning, and evolving within the span of a single campaign. The first counter-strike exemplified this approach. Small, surgically precise, and timed to exploit predator overconfidence, it inflicted damage disproportionate to its scale. Predator fleets, conditioned to react to displays of fear and submission, were caught off guard. Ships were disabled, command nodes disrupted, and key war forms neutralized. The attack was not meant to conquer, but to demonstrate a capacity for sustained resistance, signaling that humans could endure, adapt, and fight with methodical calculation. What terrified the predators most was not human firepower, but human mindset. While predators relied on instinct, ritual, and historical precedent, humans employed observation, prediction, and moral choice. Sacrifices were calculated, lives preserved when possible, and action always purposeful. The unpredictability was rooted in ethical reasoning. Decisions were informed not solely by survival, but by principles, attachment, and long-term outcomes. Predator sensors could quantify damage but could not interpret motivation, rendering the human's strategic depth effectively invisible. Resistance spread organically. Across multiple systems, humans implemented adaptive defenses, setting traps, exploiting predator expectations, and coordinating efforts at speeds predators had never experienced. Their actions were relentless but measured. Aggression was selective, designed to maximize survival rather than inflict terror. Over time, predators realized that the species they had dismissed as fragile was capable of sustained, intelligent resistance, and that every miscalculation carried escalating consequences. The galaxy began to notice. Even neutral species recognized that humans operated under a different paradigm: endurance as power, creativity as weapon, morality as strategic advantage. What had seemed insignificant, soft, and easily broken was now formidable. Humans did not need to overwhelm their enemies with force alone. Their strength lay in persistence, innovation, and the refusal to submit to fear. By the end of this phase, the predators faced a revelation: extinction of humanity was no longer a certainty, and domination was no longer a given. The species they had assumed would crumble under pressure had proven adaptable beyond expectation. Every battle, every defensive measure, and every calculated risk illustrated that humans were not prey behaving incorrectly. They were a fundamentally different kind of force, one that the galaxy had never encountered. As human resistance solidified, the predators began to encounter an unfamiliar variable: fear. Their centuries of dominance had taught them that intimidation and overwhelming force ensured compliance, yet humans repeatedly defied expectation. Fleets that had previously struck terror into civilizations now met strategic traps, feints, and evasive maneuvers that inflicted disproportionate damage. Losses accumulated not from frontal assaults but from subtle manipulations, disabled supply lines, ambushed warforms, and disrupted communication networks. Each human victory was calculated, deliberate, and psychologically destabilizing. Predator command hierarchies, built on the assumption of absolute control, faltered. Leaders who had never doubted the obedience of prey now faced internal dissent as subordinates questioned doctrine. Tactical certainty crumbled under repeated failure. Confidence gave way to hesitation, hesitation to paranoia. In battlefield simulations, predators could not predict human reactions, and improvisation at multiple scales rendered conventional strategies ineffective. The galaxy's most feared hunters were learning for the first time that not all prey could be controlled, not all dominance was absolute. Humans exploited predator psychology with precision. They anticipated ritualized patterns of aggression, using deception, misinformation, and staged retreats to manipulate predator behavior. Supply convoys were rerouted into ambushes, reconnaissance probes lured into electromagnetic traps, and combat engagements staged to maximize predator confusion. Every action revealed an understanding of predator instincts that no archive had recorded, and no calculation had predicted. The predator's historical advantage, their ability to intimidate through sheer certainty, was eroding under a species that did not respond predictably to fear. The first predator worlds to feel real consequences were those on the front lines. Entire orbital stations, previously symbols of invincibility, were rendered inoperative through sabotage and coordinated strikes. Key warforms, engineered for lethal efficiency, were neutralized using environmental manipulation and adaptive human technology. Civilians, once considered a distraction, became assets in asymmetric strategies, their relocation, survival, and participation reinforcing the human strategic depth. Each loss forced predators to reassess doctrine, yet every adjustment was met with further human innovation. Psychological warfare became central. Humans displayed behaviors the predators could not interpret: deliberate sacrifice of small units to protect broader objectives, calculated inaction to bait predator fleets, and communication strategies that sowed confusion without direct confrontation. These acts conveyed resolve and intelligence simultaneously, demonstrating a species unwilling to bend under intimidation yet unwilling to escalate to unrestrained annihilation. Predator analysts found no precedent for such behavior, creating uncertainty at every level of command. Morale, long assumed invulnerable in predator culture, began to erode. Fleet commanders hesitated, warforms hesitated, and battle strategies became conservative rather than decisive. The human's ability to endure, adapt, and manipulate expectations forced predators to confront a paradox: power alone could not dictate outcomes, and history was no longer a reliable guide. The galaxy's apex hunters were experiencing vulnerability, confusion, and fear for the first time. This psychological inversion had broader consequences. Neutral civilizations observed the conflict and recognized that human tactics were not brute force but disciplined, intelligent, and ethically consistent. Strategic alliances, previously unthinkable, began to form around shared understanding of human endurance. Humanity's resistance was contagious in concept. It altered perceptions of strength, resilience, and moral choice throughout surrounding systems. By the time predator fleets attempted a concentrated offensive, they were already reacting rather than acting. Humans had shifted the paradigm from confrontation to orchestration, forcing predators into positions where miscalculation was inevitable. Every aggressive maneuver was countered, every assumption exploited, and every expectation subverted. The apex predators who had once defined the rules of survival were now prisoners of their own underestimation. In this phase, it became clear that humans were more than resilient, they were transformative. They redefined engagement, endurance, and intelligence in a single campaign, proving that dominance was not guaranteed, and survival was not merely about strength. Predators could feel the first tremors of fear, the first cracks in certainty, and the first understanding that their centuries of supremacy might be ending. Humanity had become a force predators could neither intimidate nor predict, a species whose persistence and ingenuity would determine the future of the galaxy itself. The final phase of the conflict was defined not by conquest, but by control and restraint. Predator forces, battered and disoriented, had begun to withdraw from contested sectors, reassessing the futility of traditional dominance. Human operations continued with precision, not vengeance. Entire fleets and warforms could have been destroyed with coordinated strikes, yet humans chose containment over annihilation. Their objective was not to eradicate, but to establish an equilibrium in which their survival was guaranteed and the predator's capacity for aggression was limited. Strategic deterrence became humanity's signature. Planetary systems were fortified, supply lines hardened, and intelligence networks expanded to anticipate predator movements before they occurred. Advanced technologies, adaptive defense grids, predictive algorithms, and environmental manipulations ensured that any predator incursion would meet resistance not just in force, but in calculation. Every human decision balanced efficiency with ethical consideration, demonstrating that survival did not require the destruction of others, only the protection of themselves and the galaxy's fragile order. Predator societies, once certain of their supremacy, were forced to accept new terms. Territories previously exploited for extraction were now regulated under human oversight, monitored by surveillance and automated deterrent systems. Leaders who had anticipated swift victories were confronted with negotiations imposed from positions of strategic strength rather than diplomatic weakness. Humanity's victories were not screams of dominance but quiet, deliberate demonstrations of capability, creating an unspoken understanding that aggression would carry unacceptable consequences. The galaxy's perception of humans shifted dramatically. Neighboring civilizations, previously resigned to predator rule, began to view humanity as a stabilizing force. Where once fear dictated alliances, now strategic respect guided interactions. Humans were recognized not as conquerors, but as a species that had endured against impossible odds, adapted with ingenuity, and refused to surrender moral principles for immediate gain. Their restraint amplified their reputation, making every action, from defensive fortification to selective engagement, a testament to disciplined power. Humanity's approach to defeated predators reinforced this principle. No species was exterminated unnecessarily. Surviving predator factions were observed, contained, and incentivized to comply with a new balance of power. This approach demonstrated a crucial aspect of human strategy. Strength was measured not by the ability to destroy, but by the capacity to enforce survival while preserving opportunity for recovery. Their victories were not destructive spectacles, but deliberate calibrations of deterrence, a principle entirely foreign to the predators who had once assumed absolute dominance. The predators, in turn, learned consequences previously unknown. Their arrogance, based on millennia of uncontested success, had led them to misjudge a species whose endurance, innovation, and moral reasoning could not be quantified. They discovered that absolute strength is meaningless without adaptability, that fear can be resisted, and that civilizations capable of strategic patience can survive against seemingly insurmountable odds. Every retreat, every negotiation, and every concession was a lesson in humility written across star systems and orbital battlegrounds. Humanity's legacy was solidified not through conquest, but through demonstration. They had endured what should have destroyed them, adapted to challenges that should have overwhelmed them, and emerged with both survival and moral integrity intact. Predator threats remained, but under conditions humans had defined. The galaxy now recognized a species whose power was measured in resilience, whose influence derived from discipline, and whose choices elevated survival into a principle rather than a default outcome. In the quiet aftermath, humans did not celebrate with spectacle. They rebuilt, fortified, and prepared for the inevitable challenges that the future would bring. Their strength was not the roar of dominance, but the assurance that the predators had learned a fundamental truth: humans would endure, adapt, and persist beyond expectation. They were the species that predators could neither intimidate nor ignore, the line that no force in the galaxy could cross without consequence. Humanity had not become the apex predator, but the stabilizing force, the species that redefined power itself through ingenuity, restraint, and unyielding resolve.